So good morning. Welcome to this second day of our Congress. As you all know, the format of this Congress is to ask some foreign and well-regarded, well-known colleagues from other universities to come here and help us to rethink the future of our university. At the same time, we ask some colleagues, some professors from our university to comment on those ideas and, of course, to bring new ideas also for the discussion. And then we have a moment in which it is open to all audience, and we will be invited to also make some questions and discuss a little bit the same topics that are on the table. And in this session, we have Professor Xingkong Li from Nanyang Technological University from Singapore. So it's hard to introduce Professor Li as with an initial training. I don't know how much this matters, but on biotechnology and horticultural science. In fact, after a career in the civil service, he joined the National Institute of Education in 1991. And after several positions of leadership, he has assumed the directorship in 2006. And it was in this task or job that he took a systematic review of teacher education programs in partnership with other schools and using the revised national curriculum as key guides. This resulted in a new model that was called 21st Century Teacher Education Model that was launched in 2009. And so it was building on this extensive knowledge and experience in education that Professor Li was appointed as Vice President for Education Strategies from July 14 till June 16 of Ntu University. So, under this role, he initiated a framework that provides the support for professors across all the university to proactively adopt technology-enabled learning initiatives. And the aim is having 50% of the courses of the university incorporated with at least certain components of technology-enabled learning. So, in August 2015, he was appointed as Vice President for Alumni and Advancement, given his numerous awards, his contributions in education research works, and his outstanding career, he was invited to come and talk about higher education in a fast-changing world. How do we maintain relevance? I would say, how can we survive?
Bom dia. I do not have the courage of Professor Colini to read a sentence in Portuguese. If I do so, you may think that I'm speaking a new language. Thank you, Jose, for the introduction. And this morning, I'd like to speak. We are talking about a topic that almost every university in the world is grappling on in today's landscape. And when we talk about higher education in a fast-changing world, we have to realize two things as we relate to what Professor Coloni talked about yesterday. First, in this changing world, the university contributes a great part to the changes. And secondly, if we were to talk about the future, the university will have a great role to contribute to shape the future, both from the angle of research dimension as well in the area of educational dimension. And this morning, I would just like to talk from the educational dimension point of view, as the research part has been covered yesterday and will be touched on by Professor Graham Richards later today. Now, when we talk about education and the role of university today, yesterday we talked a little bit about the ideology of who owns the university and what a university is. But I must say that whatever ideology that we may embrace, there is a great factor that is now infiltrating into this ideology, at least from an Asian perspective. And this is the factor of pragmatism. You know, in the Asian context, when parents send their children for higher education, they do look at this from a perspective of being an investment. When they send their students for higher education, they are putting in investment from a cost point of view, and they anticipate certain expectations out of the university in a way that you will educate their students, their children, with the necessary attributes that will enable them to be employable. And when they are employable, they will be able to bring forth the returns of their investment in the process of climbing the economic ladder or the journey. Now, it is with this context I would like to bring to you the Asian perspective, and particularly from the perspective of a university, on how to develop education for our students to ensure their relevance in the 21st century. Now, what is the changes that are taking place in the 21st century that makes us say that it is in a fast-changing world? We are already into the 16 years of 21st century. We will not be using the word 21st century for too long. We will be talking about the realities of current situations within whatever era within the 21st century. And as I would just like to emphasize, that for the 21st century, in the first 16 years and anticipating in the next 10 years to go, these will be 6 key features. And in fact, we discussed this very much at the NTU Singapore in November last year when we had the Nobel Series roundtable discussion, with 5 Nobel laureates present, as well as with the captains of the industries, to really look at the thought leadership of how the future of learning will be in this changing world. But in determining what the future of learning, we have to establish what really is taking place from the angle of changes. And these are the 6 statements that came up. The first is the 21st century landscape, at least in the 16 years. We observe that it is termed as the Vuca environment. V-U-C-A, volatility, uncertainty, complexity, ambiguity. I believe when you read these 4 words, you identify with it very, what you call clearly. Volatility. Today, if you look at the financial market, one day is up, another day is down. When Europe coughs, Asia, when Europe sneezes, Asia gets a cold. You see, this kind of volatility and the interconnectedness is taking place. Second, uncertainty. Today, who can say that we are sure in 5 years' time this will be the landscape? No fortune teller will be courageous enough to say that. Complexity. You look at the issues today. How much do we understand the issues? The issues that occurs in the Middle East, the issues that led to the downfall of the Lehman Brothers banking system in the US. Even Paul Volcker, the former Federal Reserve chairman, said this: I cannot explain the reasons for the debacle of the Lehman Brothers because the issues is just so complex and ambiguous. There is nothing that is certain that we can say we clearly understand what this issue is. VUCA environment. Of course, we know the fast technological advancement. It is coming in by the minutes. And it's going to change job demands, job skills, the way we live, the way learners learn, and the way we travel into the future. That will be the impact that we'll see. Knowledge explosion, I'll come to that later. Transformation of social media, I will talk about more later. Changing profiles of learners. When you talk about education in the 21st century without talking about the learner profiles, we are missing a very, very big gap. And of course, increase in life expectancy. Somehow we ask ourselves, what has that to do with education? I'll explain a little bit later. Now, how has technology disrupted our lives? How has it changed in terms of the employment market? The World Economic Forum has constantly put forth reports. OECD put out reports, and there is a lot of reports that come out from the US and all those. These are very good pointers that help us to understand the trends that are taking place and how we need to be conscious of these trends as educators. If you look at the job top 10 skills of 2015 and 2020, it has already had 2 changes within 5 years. In fact, skills, in the past, skills takes about 2-3 decades to change. And today, we are talking about just 5 years. And soon, it may be 3 years. Now, what has changed? First, you don't see quality control in the 2020 because machines can do all the quality control now. You don't need human. Second, active learning is replaced by cognitive flexibility. Okay, psychology may help me explain that. All I understand is that beyond active listening, you need that mindset and the understanding of how to shape an understanding of the issues concerned. If you look at the disappearing jobs and the new jobs, I think this is something that many thought leaders are very much conscious of. Professions like accounting and real estate and technical writers and so on are beginning to disappear and being taken over by technological tools. So what does that mean to us as educators? How do we then train accountants in a way that will enable them to have skills that even though technology advances and the tools are changed, that they are still able to operate professionally in that profession? Now, let me assure you, I know all of us here are educators in some sense. During the Nobel Series discussion, we are being assured, professors are being assured that we will not be redundant. No machine can take over us and no technology can replace us because educators are looking at education as a human endeavor. There are skills that still need to be picked up through face-to-face interaction. Attributes and others needs a professor to facilitate in its acquisition. So, all of you are safe in your job. And if you look at the OECD chart that looks at how many jobs can be automated and what are the risks of losing existing jobs and replaced by others. This is the OECD report, but can't see Portugal in here. But nevertheless, you can see the trends that are developing in the world. Jobs are changing. Technology in its operation would require a different set of skills that graduates will need in this new landscape. Industries that are threatened by tech disruption, these are listed there. In the past, farming, people had to dig, people had to do plowing. Today, you use laser technology to even grade a farmland from as narrow as microns in terms of gradient. And that's how technology can provide in different areas of work. Knowledge explosion. Yes, you used to say every 100 over years, knowledge doubles. Then it began to shorten in terms of time. And today, we have said that knowledge will now double once every 2 years and once every year. But now, with a new concept on the Internet of Things, IoT, where different parts of the Internet interaction and knowledge can be mined and what you call linked, I'm being told that knowledge is now exploding once every day with the Internet of Things that Google is talking about. Now, in such an environment where knowledge is exploding in such fast pace, what do we teach? What do we educate? These are the questions that we need to ask ourselves. Okay? Now, social transformation. This is an area that is spreading like wildfire and difficult to control. China has been controlling Facebook, but can it prevent its people from accessing knowledge of the world? No. In the midst of this new social media landscape where things are so instantaneous and with the privilege of being anonymous, I can put up a message and something on the post without people knowing who I am. Now, this freedom has created a moral dilemma. What is my responsibility? What is my, what you call, integrity that I need to maintain? Besides that, while we can communicate well, where we can communicate widely, an advantage where educators can also tap on, but there is also the other side of things that educators need to help to shape the future. How do we inculcate values into our students? Now, this is a very interesting part. Today's students are quite different from the days where you and I are students, especially the elderly ones. We are very much passive in our learning. We listen. We sit there in rows. Today, students are very eager to participate. In fact, professors are facing the most challenging task in almost comparing to all other professions. It's because today, before you even teach, your students have already Googled the topic that you are going to teach, and they are going to ask you the most controversial questions. So if professors today are not prepared, you will be in for something from the students. And through all the studies that has been conducted, the learners of today, they are dubbed as epic learners, EPIC. Students today like to experience the process of learning. If you have ways to engage them that they will feel an emotional experience to it, the more they will learn. They like to participate in the process of learning. They do not like to just sit there and listen. In fact, the neuroscientists did a test of putting the sensor to the head of the student, sitting in a lecture room. And they did various tests in other dimensions. And they found one thing, that the brain waves of a student sitting in a lecture room is similar to that of a student sleeping. Students today want to be engaged in their learning. Image-driven, I don't need to explain, connectedness. They are connected physically, they are connected virtually, and they like to be together. And this has a great impact on the way we create pedagogy, the way we create the learning environment, and the way in which we have to develop facilities of interaction within a common space of the university campus, and so on. Lots of implication on planning of education. Life expectancy. Now, how can the university be involved in education of seniors? You see, life expectancy prolongs, and that also correlates to the retirement age of the workers. And retirement age of the workers will demand the learning of new skills, retooling. Now, all this needs to be taken care of from the role and responsibility of university. And I will explain something later how we do it in Singapore. Okay. Employers' selection criteria has also changed. I know in the British system, the honour system is so well honoured and embraced. Today, Ernst & Young in the UK is disbanding the use of honour system as a criteria for selection of candidates. Google is selecting candidates no more based on qualification nor interviews. They have their own sets of approaches. And even employers are trying to involve themselves in the process of education such that you have graduates that are relevant to them. Google tells me that unless the MBA candidate is involved in their process of contribution to the MBA program, they will not employ them. And if they were even willing to stop employment of MBAs because they feel that MBAs today do not add value to their business advancement. So, fellow educators, these are the changes of the fast-changing world. How can higher education maintain relevance in such a dynamic Vuca environment? I have no answers, or there is no one answer that is a model that fits all. I believe the context where you work on, the role that you feel that you need to play as a university to the society, and the context of the environment, such as the Asian cultural context that you need to take into consideration. I have placed here a series of questions that one needs to think of in responding to these changes. There's no one right or one wrong answer. It is how you rationalize the answers to these questions such that you ensure relevance of your program towards the students and the participants of your programs to ensure that they will be relevant in the needs of the landscape where they dwell in. Singapore is paranoid about this relevance because our economy is very much anchored on producing manpower that can really evolve the economy from the downstream activities more towards the higher upstream activities. And we are very conscious of the fact that if the skilled job change, our workforce must be retooled in their skills to cope with the needs of the economy and ensuring the workforce is relevant with the economy. It is in this context that my university looked very closely on how to develop a model of higher education programs that will really equip our students, our graduates, to be relevant in the new landscape. Not just from the angle of academic competence or whatever philosophical ideology that drives what higher education is about, but we want to ensure that what kind of attributes that we need to build in our students so that they can adapt and survive and meeting the demands and be relevant in this new landscape. I won't even call it now the 21st century landscape because as we evolve beyond the beginning of the 21st century, it is the era that you live in that you need to be relevant to. So after much process of evaluation, analysis, and interview with the thought leaders, interview with the policy makers, and interview with the industry, and interview with the public, the parents, We got all this information back, and we analyze them and summarize them, and we identify 5 key attributes as the learning outcomes of an NTU education program. We have branded our education as NTU education. And the 5 attributes are the 5 C's. You notice that in these 5 C's, there are only 2 C's that relate to professional competencies, while the rest of them are the other softer skills. And more importantly, we put this up front, character. The academic competencies are very much covered by this C, competence, and creativity. But character and civic-mindedness helps to shape, hopefully, the characteristic of the future society that we are in. You know, when the Lehman Brothers debacle came about, and who literally contributed to this whole debacle? After much analysis, Harvard University silently admitted that they have failed to look at certain aspects of their education that could have prevented this. Greed was the key that led to the fall of the Lehman Brothers debacle. And Harvard realized that in the process of educating the MBAs and so on, the value component was absent. And they refined and re-looked at their educational approaches and emphasis. And that's why we look at character and civic-mindedness, role to responsibility to the society, contribution back to the society for what the society has supported you to achieve to where you are today. So this becomes a very important attribute. So this attribute will now be looked upon by every program of the university so that they can list out the competencies within each of these attributes, and eventually this will define what your program means. I often ask my Dean of Science and the Dean of Arts, I ask them this very fundamental question. Is the degree of Bachelors of Science or the Bachelors of Art still relevant today? If it is, what defines this program? What can you describe about this program that can be considered as being relevant in today's context? And re-looking at the competence of what a BA or a BSc graduate will acquire will be defined by all this. Then when an employer look at a degree graduate from NTU, they will know that this defines what this graduate is. And this also helps to provide the identity of who an NTU graduate is. I think I got this job because I was very cheeky from time to time. One day I asked my president, I said, Patel, you know, you are a very passionate leader of this institute, of this university. Can you define who an NTU graduate is? I was then the director of the National Institute of Education, and I said, I can define to you who my teacher, the beginning teacher that graduates from my institute. Can you describe that for your university? I think he struggled. And the next thing I know is that I became Vice President of Education Strategies for NTU. So I like to share this experience with you. Don't ask cheeky questions to your rector. You may get a job. Yeah. Now, having this education plan and framework, having identified the learning outcomes of your graduates, how do you implement it? It has to take a total ecosystem approach. educational reform, either at the system or a university level, cannot be a single point of reform. It has to be a holistic, systemic approach. You see, the attributes will guide how the curriculum will be designed and how the sequencing of the curriculum has to be done and how outcomes of each of these modular bases will contribute to the whole program attributes. So every dean, every chair, every professor will have to really look at how the program needs to be redesigned, how each module needs to be designed, and how they need to link with relevance one to the other that will achieve the whole program attributes. Second, pedagogy needs to be redefined to look at how those attributes can be built. And the learning environment. You notice that this is the collaborative learning classroom first developed at the National Institute of Education, then transferred across the university to provide a collaborative learning environment for our students, where professors now are transformed from being a knowledge monopoly and a knowledge imparter to one of a facilitator. You cannot have a 20th learning environment to facilitate acquisition of a 21st century set of attributes. Today, we transfer the ownership of learning from the professor to the students. We move from learning objectives to learning outcomes. And therefore, the learning classroom, facilitated by technological tools, are now built across the whole university to facilitate active participation of the students. Remember, they are epic learners. They like to be engaged in the process of learning. And this is what we have created for them. And this is what we call the hive, which is the hive of activities. We have about 50 classrooms in there that has no classroom walls. And here the professors plays a role of being a facilitator rather than an imparter of knowledge. See, when I first did this at the National Institute of Education, educators from overseas come to have a look. And they peep through the door to see how it is functioning because they do not want to disturb the class. Then he asked me this question. He said, Professor Lee, where is the professor? I said, there you see, my model is working. If my professor can still be seen in the front, not talking to the students and lecturing them, then my whole model will not be working. Why is it working? Because the professor is walking around the classroom to facilitate thinking, participation of a discussion among the students, and so on. He is no more the center of focus. The students are. And embedded in that is how technological tools is being used to facilitate that. Now, if you look at the attributes, character, communication, and civic-mindedness, can this be taught? The answer is yes and no. I think values can be taught if you can continue to emphasize it. Like take, for example, integrity. Plagiarism is a very important issue for today. And we can continue to teach the student how to avoid and must not involve in plagiarism and what constitutes plagiarism. I think the students will be able to acquire that. But on the other hand, values can also be caught through activities and programs. And so, we organize a lot of activities and programs beyond the classroom. You see now it's a holistic development, both formal education in the classroom and non-formal education beyond the classroom. And one of the tasks that we would like the students to be very much engaged in is our university is very much close to a community of residential people in that locality. We call Jurong West. And in Singapore, public housing is a very strong feature of our housing provision for the community. And in that housing community, there will be many needs. Older people needs, people from the lower strata, they will have needs, children with special needs. How can we involve our students to be engaged in some of these social and community services? We help them and facilitate them to take ownership of planning, owning, and executing such initiatives. And through that, we hope to be able to build up this. Of course, this is the design of the academic program. But to have such the new design, new approach to be implemented, your professors need to be trained. You cannot blame a professor for not being able to facilitate a class professionally, based on pedagogical evidence and educational evidence based on research, unless you train them. So we systematically train professors to facilitate classroom discussion, to facilitate engagement of the students in the process of learning. And of course, with the advancement of the tools to be engaged in education, your computer infrastructure has to change, has to be upgraded. And what about the library? You know, friends, in today's era, every single norm must be challenged. What is the norm of a library? Give you a hint. I'm often thrown out of the library simply because my voice is too loud. What is the norm? Silence. Today, if you continue to maintain silence in the library, your library will be very silent because you won't have students going there. So what we did, because students love to have interactive learning, interactive discussion, they take ownership of their learning. So what we did is, in the heart of the library at the National Institute of Education, we created a Starbucks-like cafe. And when the director brings the guest to the library, he can't find an empty table. Simply because the whole floor, students will be there. You provide, of course, the Wi-Fi. You provide charging points. You provide tables that they can gather together to talk, to continue the discussion from the classroom that they have been engaged in. And all this will help to build up the attributes. So that's why you need that holistic approach to it. Now, coming to the point of, can we measure the value add to education? The answer is an absolute important component in this whole ecosystem. That's why we set up this center called Cradle at NTU. What does Cradle stand for? Cradle stands for Center for Research and Development in Learning. I'm still the director of the center. I have a team of researchers working with the professors from the various schools to develop instruments that can measure the learning outcomes that has been identified for either a module or for the program. We first begin with the modules. Say, if this module have this set of learning outcomes, at the end of the module implementation, have this outcome really been achieved? Have they been achieved with the aid and facilitation of the technological tools that we use? Or where are the gaps that we have missed? These research findings are important to look back, to refine your pedagogy, your processes, even your curriculum design. So you need to invest in educational research, even at the university level, not just looking at research for school students, you also need to look at the tertiary level students, because the age or adolescence, they are quite different. So, Cradle was formed to do this research, to measure value addedness of learning outcomes, to see whether indeed at the end of the day, the attributes of our Ntu education has been achieved. And to measure this totally, you have to really wait until the students have gone forth into the industry. You have to check with their employers whether they do exhibit these attributes. For the National Institute of Education, we do that very proactively with the schools, with the principals, with the senior teachers, to get feedback about how our beginning teachers are performing. So this is what I call it the Ntu Education Ecosystem, a very systemic process. And even for the technology-enabled learning, it is not a complete replacement of the professors. It is a blended learning that you need to engage. And we have devoted $75 million to relook at how blended learning is to be designed and developed for the next 5 years. Now, what about lifelong learning? You know, during the 4 years or 3 years of the undergraduate programs, we noticed that no one program can prepare our graduates with every skills that a particular job in today's era will require. We do get feedback from our alumni. So we set up this College of Professional and Continuing Education to support our alumni as they advance in their career. They will feedback to the alma mater, say, hey folks, you didn't teach me these skills, no, and I need this in this job. We will welcome back that alumnus into the university, either audit a course or there is a group of them that requires others. We prepare and design particular courses that can help them to bridge that gap, the skills gap that they need, so that they will be able to be relevant and be able to perform the job. But if you look at the views of thought leaders, they say very clearly, not just by one, but by the whole community of them, very consistent in this view, that a graduate today, when he enters this job market, he has to unlearn and relearn 6 cycles. So how does the university support your alumni in that? So besides our alumni, we look at the broader industry needs. So you may notice that NTU education may seemingly be very much driven by the needs of the employment market. Not so. We have other attributes that we want to build for what a graduate needs to be developed that can identify that graduate as indeed an NTU graduate, a proud flag bearer of the university. So with that, I thank you.
So it's time now for our commentators. And just briefly introducing them, I suppose that all of you, or many of you, know them. We have José Varejão, that he's professor in economics at the Faculty of Economics, University of Porto. He has studied here, where he has obtained his PhD, and his research interests are on applied labor economics. He has been the scientific coordinator of the Center for Economics and Finance of our university until 2013. He is a research fellow at the Institute for the Study of Labor since 2009. And last but not the least, he is the Dean of the Faculty of Economics, which I believe is his main source of troubles nowadays. Then we have, looking for my notes, we have João Claro. He's from the Department of Industrial Engineering and Management of the Faculty of Engineering. He is also a member of the Board of Directors of Inesc Tech, that's a research institute, a affiliated with the University of Porto and other universities, and he is responsible for the area of technology transfer and entrepreneurship. He is also a member of the Academic Council of Porto Business School and heads the Innovation and Entrepreneurship academic area. He was a visiting scholar at MIT, and last but not the least, he is the National Director of the Carnegie Mellon Portugal program, which is an international partnership in information and communication technology between Portuguese universities, research labs and companies, and CMU, and it is funded by Fundação para a Ciência e Tecnologia.
Let me just interrupt to say that the CMU Portugal program is 10 years old precisely today.
Wow. Happy birthday. Good. So this was the last but not the least for João Claro. And finally, we have Daniel Freitas on my extreme right. On the table. He's master in informatics, engineering, and computation from the Faculty of Engineering of the University of Porto, and is currently student in the Master on Services and Engineering and Management, also in the Faculty of Engineering. He started his training in the higher education system in 2009, and it is relevant that he entered the University of Porto with the best mark in the country. So it was that year the best student in the country with the highest mark entering. And I'm saying this is relevant because he then started his path as in the Students' Union of PhilP. He had several jobs there and ended as the president of the direction of the Students' Union. After that, he was elected for the General Council of the University. He is currently member of the Conseil National d'Éducation, CNE, so National Council for Education, I don't know if it's the right translation. And last but not the least, he's now in the second term, I believe. He's president of the Federação Académica do Porto, which is basically, if I can say this in English, the union of the students' unions. So all the schools and universities in the Porto region are affiliated with this academic organization. And a lot of things more that Daniel will forgive me, that I will not mention. Having this said, word for our invitees, and I will start by the order that is on the program, asking João to make some comments or bring some new ideas for the table. Thank you very much. Yes.
Do I need to press anything?
No, just direct it, yeah.
Good morning. First of all, I would like to thank the Rector and Vice Rector Pedro Teixeira for inviting me for this panel. I would also like to congratulate Professor Lee Sing Kong for the very interesting and very challenging presentation. So I'm going to make 3 comments if I have the time. And so these are concerns that I have in my head and experiences that I have in my hands that were somehow agitated by having a look at the slides and listening to the presentation. And just a small disclaimer, if I had to think of myself framed in this Congress, I would probably have placed myself in the research commercialization panel, so that's an area where I have been extremely active. So maybe the reason why I am here is we can have a dialogue with expertise and concerns also from other areas. So I will also try to bring something from that area. So the first thing that I would like to share with you is something that has been at the core of my thinking about education for the past few months. This came to my mind again because, strangely, I found this word absent from your presentation and from your talk today. And the word is scientist. And what got me thinking about scientists was a commencement speech a few months ago in Caltech by the surgeon Atul Gawande. And the beginning of the speech and the speech itself shocked me as an educator, because I didn't have a scientist as a key thing, as a key concern, as I think about education. And so I will read very briefly the beginning of his speech, and then I will move from there. So what he said was the following: this is the beginning, if this place has done its job, and I suspect it has, you're all scientists now. So he is talking to all the students that are graduating. Sorry, English and history graduates, even you are too. Science is not a major or a career, it is a commitment to a systematic way of thinking, an allegiance to a way of building knowledge and explaining the universe through testing and factual observation. The thing is, that isn't a normal way of thinking. It is unnatural and counterintuitive. It has to be learned. So I was shocked to read this and to imagine that students at the end of their, especially undergraduate students at the end of their programs, sitting in their commencement ceremony, hear someone telling them that the key thing that they are taking away from the university is that they are all scientists. And so then this got me thinking about a history, a small piece of a story that I like very much from my favorite book about creativity. It's a book called Orbiting the Giant Hairball by Gordon Mackenzie. And in the beginning of the book, he tells his story of going with an exhibition to schools, elementary schools, and talking to the students in elementary school. And so he usually starts with lower grades, classes, and he goes up, from first to fourth. And what he does in all the classes is he looks around, he sees the artwork that the students have on the walls, and he says, I feel really great here, because looking around me, I can see that, just like myself, this class is full of artists. And then he asks the kids, so who wants to be an artist when you grow up? And what he sees is, in first grade, all the kids jump, saying that they want to be an artist, trying to reach the ceiling with their hands. And as he moves, the final thing that he sees is a very shy couple of kids back in the class that kind of raise their hands like this. And so his thinking is there must be something sinister happening in schools that takes away the will of the students to be artists. So the question that I would like to leave here for the discussion is something like this happening with scientists? And is that the reason why the word scientist is not on this presentation and was not in the talk initially? So maybe that slide with the student who has the blackboard, maybe the word scientist should be what should stand there in the blackboard that she's holding in her hands. So it's a provocation and a question for the discussion. So then, how much time do I have more? 5 minutes. Okay. So I will talk about the second thing that I wanted to share, and then I will leave the other maybe for the discussion. And it's looking at the challenges that we are seeing. So I was in a panel about a year ago of the Portuguese Association for the Development of Communications, and the panel was on millennials and the education of millennials, the challenges in managing millennials in companies. And so the framing is a bit similar to some of what we are seeing here today. And so as I was seeing some videos of millennials that had been interviewed, and reading a bit some reports about the challenges of managing millennials, I actually identified myself a lot with millennials, but 20 years ago. So I was a millennial 20 years ago. So, you know, these questions of connectedness and being online, all of this, I was like that 20 years ago. And I was like that because I was in IT, but not just because I was in IT. 20 years ago, I was in IT at the university. And so I think that the university should feel comfortable about its role in the world regarding all these changes. Because, as was mentioned in the beginning, many of these changes are created by us and are experienced by us firsthand. You know, all this rate of change in innovation, accumulation of knowledge, this is something that the science enterprise is leading and handling way before many other enterprises in the world. So I kind of feel comfortable with these challenges, and I really believe that we have unique capabilities that can allow us to lead and have an important role in coping with these challenges. And so I would stop here.
Thank you very much, João. José Verjão.
Good morning. I will start by thanking the invitation to be here and comment the very interesting presentation by Professor Lee. I won't comment it directly. I will take it as the starting point to raise some issues that I believe are related that we should also consider when thinking about the future of the university and the University of Porto in particular. What Professor Lee reminded us today in the very beginning of his speech was that we live in a world of change. Everything changes around us, from technology to demography and to the society itself. And that, so was his line of reasoning, I believe, has implications for the economy, then it has implications for the labor market, and therefore it should have implications for the universities and the way they prepare themselves to meet the challenges ahead of them. I was trying to go unnoticed as a labor economist, but José Fernando turned me in, so I no longer can do that. My first thought when I was reading Professor Lee's slides was something that labor economists like to teach their own students in the first class, that is that the labor market is in a permanent state of flux, meaning that every day new jobs are created, all jobs are destroyed, people change from one place to the other, jobs are reallocated across industries, across space, and therefore, although I realize that there is an intense process of change going on, the fact that that is always the case. So what is really new here? What is the new thing that makes us more keen on these topics? And I believe that should be the base of the changing process itself. But then here we are facing this contradictory exercise that is to recognize that everything is changing around us, and still we are trying to anticipate the future. The very first question is, how successful are we meant to be in this exercise, given the fact that we are assuming that we know what will go on in, let's say, 10 years' time. And another thing that a labor economist will tell you immediately is that typically when someone gets into the labor market, you'll stay there for 40 years, not for 5, not for 10. So we are preparing people to meet labor market demands immediately, but also in 10, 20, 30, and 40 years' time. And that is really too much to ask to someone for a prospective exercise as the one that we are doing here. And the question that I think we should also ask is, what is the risk involved in the strategies that we are designing in such an environment, in such an uncertain environment, given the fact that we are planning or claiming that we want to prepare ourselves to meet the society's needs, meaning the enhancing the effectiveness of our education programs and meet the employer's needs and the students' expectations. That will all change very rapidly and many times in the time of an individual's path in the labor market. So are we really assessing the risk of the strategies that we are defining, because universities can't change every 2 or 3 years, right? So this would be the first question that I would suggest that we also consider in the discussion. Then the second question, a broader one that Professor Lee mentioned in his speech, has to do with diversity within universities and how we prepare to deal with that. My feeling, eventually, possible because I become from an economics school, is that these issues are not the same in different areas and do not stand exactly in the same way for different schools, let's say, within the University of Porto. The focus here was very much in preparing people to meet labor market needs, but in fact what we were talking about was about corporate needs. Not all of us educate our students for the same professional careers. We do not all face the same challenges, and I wonder if what was said, and that I fully agree with, stands equally true for all the different areas that typically we can find within a university. And if they don't, what are the implications for the way the university organizes itself internally and for the degree of diversity that is allowed within the university? My concern is that we are focusing on a very narrow path of exit from the university to the labor market, and that we are missing a great part of the picture by doing that. And that has to do with my final comment, that was in fact motivated by the example that Professor Lee mentioned when he referred to Harvard University and its role in the financial crisis. The claim by Harvard University itself was that it missed an important part of the identification of the training and education requirements of the people they were educating, and by doing that, they failed and made us all fail. I wonder if the way we are still thinking about what we should do in the future is not doing exactly the same that probably led Harvard into this conclusion. We are still thinking, as I believe Harvard University was doing in the 1980s, about what the market wants us to teach our students and what students want us to teach them. Put it differently, we are still thinking about what are the expectations, employers' expectations and students' expectations that we should meet. And my concern is that by doing that, and of course we have to do that, we don't live in an isolated world, I'm not claiming that we shouldn't do that, but my concern is that we are overemphasizing that part of our job and neglecting the other part of our job, that is what what makes universities distinctive and is at the very roots of their existence. That is citizenship training, citizenship education. That probably was what Harvard University in the end felt that he had missed when was training their MBA students for working in the financial sector or other parts of the economy. So the real issue that I believe we should also consider is this one. How do we balance what we know that we should do, because that's why we exist, and we exist for many centuries, with what are the changing needs of the society that, of course, we have to meet, because that's also an important part of our mission. And this goes also, I'm still talking about the education component of our mission, but I believe this could be said exactly in the same way for research, as João just mentioned. In research, the issue is exactly the same. How do we balance research that is needed to meet the economy's and the society's needs with the very fundamental nature of research that is in the origin of the other applied research that should be directed to those needs that, as we know, are ever permanently changing and therefore permanently questioning and the universities. So these would be the three questions I would like to raise.
Thank you very much. And now, Daniel, please, what is the student's perspective of all this?
Okay, thank you very much. I would like to thank our rector for the invitation to be here. Of course, Professor Lee for his inspiring presentation. And the world is changing. Everyone knows it, and is a great sentence to start. As you may understand, I'm a student of this university. I'm also very concerned about these subjects because during my last 4 or 5 years, I was used to discuss, listen, to talk with my colleagues, with some professors about the education strategies and the changes that we are facing today and that have a strong relevance in the process of teaching and the process of learning. Thinking about Portugal in these moments of our history, and as Professor Lee said, also in the world, to have a degree don't give us the guarantee to having a job or a job for our entire lives, as we can see in the generation of my parents, for instance. And these facts represent the first great challenge when we think about higher education in our society. There is a false belief that to study in higher education doesn't worth it because there are no jobs for everyone. And it is very complicated among, not in the higher education students, but in the society to fight against these thoughts. When we see, for example, in our country, a young unemployment rate around 30%, this problem should be understood by the higher education institutions that must rethink about what they do and what they should do about their mission, especially in terms of education. We have some very strong institutions like University of Porto that are very good at teaching and research skills. But the challenges that we are facing in the beginning of this 21st century are already shows us that this is not enough. It's very important, in my opinion, that our university can build great citizens. As we saw in some examples that Professor Lee showed us, those citizens that are available to learn how to learn and to learn how to adapt to this new world and these new challenges, in order that they can upgrade their skills and themselves, of course, in the future, or even change their area of knowledge. The changes in the world are completely insane, as we already saw in this presentation. The best, and we think that the best degree holders should also be the well-prepared ones to face these changings. I think the higher education institutions also have to create more understanding and connection about the employers' needs and the qualification of their graduates, because there is a gap. Everyone knows there is a gap between them, and we need to face this problem and try to solve this problem, because in most of the cases, in lots of companies, the first thing that candidates do is to do more formation when they arrive, and not only circumstantial formation, much more formation and specific formation that really can be done in the university, where the knowledge is and the knowledge is built. In fact, the authors of the book Higher Education tells us that, I'm not reading the quote, but it shows us that this gap, and we need to reduce this gap between the giving skills to reduce it. And this is one of the problems that we have to solve. Also, when I have the opportunity to think about the top skills that Professor shows us, in 2020, most of them that are reaching the top, of course, there are some of them that are related to hard skills, but the most of them are related to, are very connected with soft skills and the critical thinking, maybe the creativity, maybe the coordination with others, and the way that we live in our society, and how we can give more value to the hard skills that, of course, we learn in these classes. And this shows that it's crucial to educate citizens for our society. And this kind of education, a lot of times, is happening in parallel contexts to the course. For example, being in teams, playing sports, being in students' associations and volunteering programs, research groups, for instance. This kind of experience are very important to achieve this goal of educating citizens. And universities have to understand to create, not to do it in a formal way, but to create facilities to recognize this kind of learning in informal ways that students are doing out of the classes, and recognize it as good practices too. It was important that the students can also in their programs choose some kind of subjects they want to learn, not only the hard ones, the hard skill ones, but some subjects related to soft skills that maybe inside the curricula, but they can choose between them. Of course, not all the curricula, but to have some percentage that can be chosen by the students. And also, universities can't ignore the digital revolution in higher education. Nowadays, every one of you know that we have thousands of online courses for free with some of the best universities in the world. That those well-known as MOOCs. And I think that only we can have one attitude. We need to start to play this game. We need to start to compete and cooperate with the best, because there are some parts of our classes that are completely outdated, in our opinion. Why? For example, repeat every year dozens of classes that are exactly the same. Why don't we use video? Of course, we don't have to replace all the classes. That will be insane and some kind of stupid. But we have to engage in the digital revolution, because it will free time. The teachers professors will have more free time to do other stuff, like facilitating students and create this environment that Professor Lee shows us in his presentation. And to finish, of course, the future is changing and is changing, and the jobs are the people are replaced for robots and for machines. And there are two kind of main options. to understand that the technological revolution is destroying jobs, or to assume that and understand that the jobs are being destroyed can be opportunities to create new ones and to have free time to create new ones and to face those challenges. Only to finish the 2015 Global University Employability Survey and ranking that engaged the top 150 universities in the world and rated by 460 and 600 recruiters and companies tells that 48% of respondents have recruited candidates due to qualifications via MOOCs. And these, my three final messages are, or we play or we die. The first one, to do exactly the same isn't the solution for the future. And much more important, I don't know if it is only a Portuguese thing, but we need to fight against the resistance to change, because avoiding being irrelevant in the future. The final provocation, and I assure you that is the final, Professor Claro said that the girl was holding a blackboard. Okay, I will check it, and of course, it's really a blackboard, but when I saw the image, I thought it was a tablet. So I think this could be a great sentence to the discussion. Thank you very much.
We are irremediably late, but before giving some room for questions and from the audience that I will ask to be really sharp and concise, I will give the floor to Professor Lee to comment on the comments. Briefly, please.
Thank you very much. I think the discussants have raised very pertinent questions, and I think it is for all of us to be able to engage in the discussion. But I think for the first issue about whether you need to be a scientist, I would say that if I were to change now, I would say I'm a learner. You see, a learner is like a scientist. You learn and you inquire, and what is the role of a scientist? The role of a scientist is that you investigate and discover into new domains, and this is what a learner ought to do, yeah? And so our program focuses on students to acquire the skills to learn how to learn, yeah? And I'm very encouraged by Daniel's comments about relevance and so on, but I can assure you, you have a rector who is very proactive and specific in terms of thinking of the issues that you have raised. Yeah, I had a conversation with Professor Sebastian in April this year, and I was very encouraged by his far-sightedness. That's why leading to the organization of this Congress. That is to think of the future. What are we to do that can help our students to be relevant? I know there will be risk. There will be absolute risk in predicting the future or what we do for the future. But if that risk can be mitigated by rationalization with certain evidence that support whatever approaches or journey that we intend to take, I think that risk will be a calculated one. Okay? But I think we do need to take that risk. Otherwise, we will remain where we are. So I stop there.
Thank you very much.